5 public meetings. The Girdwood Board of Supervisors operates under the Girdwood Public Meeting Standards of Conduct. I'm calling this meeting to order at 10:03 a.m. This is Brianna Sullivan, co-chair and Fire Department Supervisor. Online, let's start with Jennifer.
Jennifer Wingard, Land Use Supervisor.
Thank you. And then Mike and Guy.
Hi, it's Mike Edgington, Housing and Economic Development Supervisor, and I'll be there in person in a couple of minutes.
Thank you, Mike.
Guy Wade, Parks and Cemetery Supervisor.
Thank you, Guy. I have not heard from Amanda, so I don't know if she is excused. And are there any disclosures today? Seeing and hearing none, I'll ask for a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll move to approve.
Move. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. Any oppositions? All right. We'll go by assent. The September 13th budget work session number 3 is approved. Announcements. The public is encouraged to ask questions and provide comment. Raise your hand and wait to be acknowledged. To help discussion stay productive, please direct your comments to the board rather than other members of the public, and keep your comments focused on the business under discussion. Be respectful of everyone's opinions. Thanks everyone for coming this morning, and we'll start with number 1 on the agenda, budget overview and capital budgets.
Yeah, I'll kind of run through the budget overview fairly quick because you guys are well versed with this and we don't have a lot of visitors today. But here in our packet today is the mill levy by tax district, and Girdwood is tax district 4. And then you can see our total taxes that we paid in 2023 is 12.56 mils. And so that gives you a comparison to all the other tax districts that are here in the municipality, which is 59. There's some numbers missing in there, but there is quite a few different tax districts, and you can see people pay everything from just road maintenance to the tax district that surrounds us just pays for school essentially, which is like the Turnagain Arm area. And they pay a little bit for police, but for the most part, that's just for emergency services, major events. So that just gives you a rundown there, and it's kind of nice to see all the different things there. But the thing I do point out is that with the essential services, which I would consider fire, police, Parks and Rec, and road and drainage, we come in at the lowest for the mill rate, and still provide those services to the community. So that gives you a perspective there. Whereas downtown Anchorage, you can see we're at 12.56. Downtown is paying 17.03 mils for their services there. This is kind of a breakdown of our history. It just shows you what the mill rate is for Girdwood as compared to downtown. As you can see, we've had up and down years with our mills. Our budgets have climbed over the years, but for the most part, our mill rate has stayed within the 12 area. As a individual service area, we're capped at 6. So you can see over here in this line, the GVSA mill, that gives you the history of the mill there. There was a significant jump in the mill rate once we took on police service. So that made a difference there. But then since then, we've managed with the police service in here, going back and forth. And then a big change for us has been the assessments in the valley. So the property values have gone up. We've seen new construction. So that's added more assessment to the valley, more value. And so that always is a factor in determining mill rates every year, based on the service area assessed value. So, and we'll probably see that again this year. There's quite a bit new construction coming in. I don't know how much the actual house prices will be, will go up according to the assessor, but we definitely are seeing new construction. So that's new assessed value that's been brought into the valley that way. So that is a quick overrun of where we stand. Before I jump forward, does anybody have any questions related to the mill rate and the calculations there and things like that?
Kyle, do you know
Right.
when we will know this upcoming mill rate? I know you and Mike have forecasted a little bit. Like, when will we get the property assessed value?
That's usually the beginning of the year, and
Okay.
we'll probably reach out to the assessor again to maybe, well, they usually reach out to us if it's going to be a large increase. You know, in certain years there, we saw anywhere from 12 to 18% increase in assessed values. Basically, the assessor's office was catching up to what the real estate market was doing. And still, when you look at the assessed values for our homes, what the city assess and what maybe what the realities of the market are, we're fairly lower for those assessed values than what's happening out there in the actual market. But they usually try to catch up once in a while. And I think a big increase this year will be the new construction that's going on. It feels like every road you drive down around now, right now, there's some sort of new construction or remodel going on in that aspect. So.
Thank you, Kyle. Mike, did you have something?
Yeah, I'll probably have more to say when I'm actually there in person, but I have my laptop in front of me. But to answer the question about when we get the assessments, it's generally they're finalized in March, and first quarter budget revision is the time when you get the final numbers and the OMB calculations of the bill rate. So that's where we'll know what the actual bill rate will be. So that's April typically.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Kyle. And if anyone has questions, just jump in today, please. So we're probably all looking at different screens. Go ahead, Kyle.
The fund balance here is, this is where we're at right now with our fund balance. As you can see, we have 3 lines here, and it starts as our total balance that we have in the Girdwood service area, which, you know, is just about $1.25 million. And then we always have a reserve for our bond rating designation. And so you can see the $251,000 there. And then we have a reserve for less working capital reserve. And so that's kind of like an emergency rainy day fund right there, which, you know, we tapped into with the Halloween storm. And that's $608,000 right now. So we've replenished those accounts. We did drain them down. That working capital account, we drained it down pretty good during the that emergency repair, but we have replenished that. And now we have a undesignated balance, so it's not tied to anything. It is of $390,000. So those accounts have been replenished, and they actually are strong. So that's a good thing for the service area. We have that reserve of $390,000, and that's something we can look at. You know, if we get down the road and that count grows, and we finally get to the loan aspect about the Engine 41, for example, we can pull funds from here to have less of a loan amount out there. So that's a good thing. We're happy to see that. This isn't audited, but I talked to the auditor, and they said most likely Girdwood's not going to change. They're going to see more things associated with the Anchorage Bowl that might change, but for the most part, this is where it stands. I think what we'll do is we'll dive into CIP and give you guys a kind of idea of what we've been doing for contributions for CIP and the capital count. And we'll talk about these individually too, probably with each department budget. But right here is just kind of a history of what we've done for contributions into the capital count, and how much overall by year that is added up to between roads, parks, and fire. And then also what we paid on capital debt service. So as you can see in the early 2017-18, we were still actually paying off Engine 41, which now we're about to replace. And so that was a slow process of paying down the debt. And you can see each year it got smaller and smaller, even down to the fact we had to pay $5 in 2019, which is funny. And then since then, we've been adding into capital, and I feel like the service area has taken responsibility to start supplying funds for those capital needs. And as you can see, roads I don't know what 18 was, but sometimes that's just an anomaly where we move money around. But we were slow on road capital until 2022 when we jumped it up to 125. And then we've been progressive on Parks and Rec. And then we've been kind of steady on fire, as you can see there with that 74 or 72,000 in those contributions over the years. So you can see the different individual departments and how much we put into each account and had there along the way. So that's just a perspective on capital accounts and where we stand there. Let me just slide down here. We can always come back if you got questions to that, but I just want to see what the next slide is. So before we do that, I'll just take any questions associated with this display here, and then I can just slide into the capital list that we've previously talked about, but it should be good to roll through those capital needs in the coming future. So sorry, go ahead. Anybody got any questions?
A comment and a question. So looking at the number now, we're approaching 1 mil just for capital. I think one would be about 700. It's basically we take our valuation in millions and convert it into thousands. So I think we're just under 1 million capital contributions now, which is much higher than it's been in the past, but I think rightfully.
Yes, and so and that is a good point, and it's integrated within our operating budgets, but we are capturing 1 mil of capital contributions every year, close to it, that we're proposing for this year. And so yeah, that's what we're looking at there. Go down.
Can I just jump in real
Sure.
quick? It's interesting to look at the different numbers in the accounts there, and one might argue that Parks looks abundantly funded next to, well, anything else. Excuse me. I suppose at some point we could look at whether or not we would need to change our budget line items to, well, in particular, fill out roads a little more or equalize these things a little bit.
True, and it's a good point. I think we're much more aggressive with Parks because we had larger projects within Parks, like the playground or the tennis courts, and then we did the crosswalk flashing lights under Parks because it was part of delivering kids to a recreational area. So we were aggressive there, and I think we just sort of stuck with it in that aspect. And then I think we realized that with roads, we needed to pick it up there. And then fire is maintained at that level, but it is something there. And the thing I want to make sure the board understands is that we can always go look at individual accounts and say, hey, let's pull, 200,000 from the Parks capital account and put over the fire and move money around. So it's within your realm to look at those accounts and say, hey, we can pull money from fire and put it over here. May not be what we want to do, but there's no restriction on it. So I'm just trying to be clear with that.
One more follow-up question about that. We don't currently have any big projects that you can think of in the wings for Parks. Is that right?
Well, the next big ones, we'll talk about that here in the capital projects. The next big ones will be planning projects. We do need to recoat the tennis courts. And I do think that playground, is coming up on 20 years. It's a wood structure. And so I think that's something we need to start looking towards with, either maintenance or replacement down the road. So.
Can I just clarify what we're looking at then? What we're looking at that total line at the bottom is not our balance, is it? It's the total amount that was put into those accounts over the last, 8-9 years?
Correct. And then further down, I will give you a current balance, but these are the contribution and how much contribution we've made to each account over the years, not including the expenditures that have been pulled out of these accounts.
Yeah, so this is the income, but we have to.
Correct. Like right now it shows 616,000 for the fire department. Well, the fire department account's down to like 100 and something because we pulled out the money for the down payment on Engine 41. Yes. So yeah.
And sorry, one last thing.
Yeah.
I probably won't be my last thing either. When things like the Flasher project, we got repaid we got that repaid by DOT, but when it came back from DOT, did that go into undesignated?
No.
It did go into the.
It went into this account.
Okay.
Yep.
So it can go into account.
It can go back in the account. If we can steer it that way, we try to.
Got it.
Otherwise it becomes complicated getting money
Nice.
around. So let's quickly talk about capital projects. So right now we are working on engine 41 for capital. And so with fire department and the loan debt payment fund, that's what I'm starting to describe it as, is that up here we have a contribution, and I might have screwed this up a little bit, but I'll figure it out as we go here. I want to talk about right now, we are proposing in the budget, collecting $80,000 for the loan debt payment. And the way it looks like we have it right now, with the amount we're going to repay, which would be, $800,000 over 20 years, that would take us $104,000 a year to repay that. What we've learned just in the last month is that we will not start making loan payments until the engine arrives. We've put down the down payment. We have actually paid up front for the whole engine. And what has happened is we've taken money from the capital account, and the city has taken from their general fund and has funded this engine to be made. But once the engine is done and we know the full cost, because there probably will be some things that will change as you go through it, as always, there's going to probably be some change order. We know the full cost of what the loan's going to be. Then at that point, we will engage in the loan. So it actually might work for our benefit, especially if interest rates go down 14 months from now, probably when this engine is ready, that we can get the engine and maybe the interest rates are down and we've saved more money, and we've looked at different ways that we can have actually a smaller loan amount. And so I still recommend that we pull the $104,000 this year as part of the operating budget, and then we're going to stick that in an account. What happened last year is we didn't use the $80,000 from 22, so we need to go into the undesignated account and pull that out, and then we have a contribution for $80,000 currently right now in our operating budget for 23, and we need to stick these all together, and then that way we build up a fund, so by the time we do get the engine delivered and we are going to take a loan out, we can put a larger down payment down and have less of a loan amount that we'll be paying against for however long it takes us to pay it off. So I just wanted to describe there. That probably is clear as mud, but I just want to get a sense for that. So I probably open up for questions on that one, so it could be confusing.
Oh, Kyle, thank you very much. I thought that was pretty well stated. The only thing that I would go back to is, when do we have maybe a muddy idea of when we'll know the cost of the loan?
Most likely
January.
Most likely the end of 24. So these engines right now are taking 12 months to build, 12 to 14 months to build. So at that point in time, we'll know. We know actually the base cost right now. We know, we've set it. They paid for it. And so right now we're going off the basis that we have 800,000 that we're going to take out for a loan. But due to the fact that we've not paid last year on it and won't be paying next in 23, this current year, and then we're going to take out 104, we could drop that loan down to 500,000 within that area and have a much better loan. And then the board could say, hey, let's look at the undesignated account, pull 100,000 out of there. All of a sudden we're down to 400,000 we're taking out for a loan. And then we could progressively pay that off over the next 5 to 10 years and have it done pretty quick. So there's some options there in that aspect. But we know that the engine is about $1 million, just over $1 million that the engine's costs. And right now in our undesignated account, we have 150,000 held as contingency reserve. So if there's something that comes along and all of a sudden we realize the engine needs something else, or there's a cost issue, we have that contingency fund in reserve. And then we've pulled out the $201,000 there for the down payment. So So right now, the current amount available, if we went to that account today for Girdwood, we would have $66,000 that we could use for, and they're coming to you at the next meeting asking for a small trailer. It's just a couple $1,000s, but we're going to pull it from that fund. So we only have $66,000 available right now that we can use for anything else, like buying hose or turnouts or things like that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Kelly, quick question on that. So the Muni ordered those, is that correct? They ordered like 6 of them?
They ordered 6 of them, and they ordered 5, and we jumped in as number 6. So we got in on a discount order, and then the other part of the discount was paying for them all up front. So so that they were secured.
Wasn't there one for Chuka?
No.
So we're paying the Muni back for this?
Yeah, we'll be paying the Muni back. So the Muni has a general fund, and so part of the resolution that the Assembly approved was for them to use the money from the general fund to pay for the upfront costs. But then once we're done with it, and so what's nice is that we're not paying interest on an engine that we're not operating for the next year. But once the engine's ready and it can drive down the street and come to Girdwood, we take out a loan, and at that point, as a service area, we can determine, hey, let's put a bunch more money towards this loan, or less money towards this loan, and let's pay a lot more out of what we have. And then we can have a smaller loan that we pay for the next 20 years, or maybe it only takes us 5. So to pay it off, it just depends on how aggressive we want to be with it.
So we get our loan and we just hand that chunk over. We pay the Muni the whole thing, and then we can work with our loan person on paying off early and all that, no penalties.
Yeah, no penalties. It's basically like an auto loan. So what happens is the city, once the engine's done, the city will say, okay, we need to settle up. You guys need to pay back the general fund. So it'll be either through a loan or what we pull out of our accounts to pay that loan. That basically gave us a no interest loan for the next 12 to 14 months. So.
Okay. All right. Cool. Thanks for clearing that up.
Yeah. This is kind of, these are capital projects right now in action. So we have designated areas. And so right now we have 205,000 available for the Glacier Creek Bridge. That's from the 500,000. We've spent probably about 75% of the other 200 and something thousand that's associated with the Glacier Creek Bridge for the design work right now. So that's sitting there. We have an undesignated capital account right now of 791,000 for parks. So that account is strong right now in that aspect. So we do have the ability to move some money around there if we wanted to. And then we have 47,000 left in the community room right now because we just did the AV upgrades in here. So it probably might be smart for us to consider moving money back to that account and bringing that up. So in total right now, there is 839,000 in the Girdwood Parks and Rec account. But some of that is already encumbered for certain projects. So you would say 791,000 is available at this point in time. And then street funds, this gives you an idea of what our money's tied to and what's available. So right now, an undesignated account, we have 567,000 available in there. I do still need to make a contribution, so that would actually be 700,000 that we need to make there from our operating account. We haven't that money is actually tied up right now. The 200,000 is tied up because it's a capital project. It's tied up with the Moose Creek culvert that we just did. And we just got the final invoicing on that. And that came in $15,000 under budget for that project. Our engineer estimate was $15,000 more than it cost. And that was because of field changes that we made and AWU supported that saved us a ton of money out there. But right now we tied that money to that capital contribution because it's in operating and we didn't have to move it back. So it'll be a little bit less going to, so just to probably roughly say we will have $600,000 in undesignated capital funds after this operating year. And then you can see some of the money tied to the different projects. So the Moose Meadows, you can see there the 243,000. We're not going to use all that money. That's just money that's encumbered. So we'll probably release that once the project's done, and then we'll put that back into the undesignated account to use. The next two projects are the most expensive: the Alyeska Creek at Davos and the Alyeska Creek at Mount Hood. Each one of those are going to be somewhere in the $600,000 to $700,000 range for those culverts, because we have to lower the water line in those locations, and then they become box culverts. And I really do want to push forward to see if we can try to do that next year. And that's why I was looking at the larger capital contribution this year in roads, was to help fund, if not one, but both of these projects. I think one definitely, two may be a stretch, just because of what we're dealing with. But I definitely want to come back to the board through the fall and talk more about that and see ways that we can make that happen, because we have the plans and everything in hand. Western's shown that they can do it. I don't know if we'll go with Western, but we may go out to bid and hope Western gets it again, just because it's a much more expensive project in that aspect. So we'll examine that and try to figure it out. So that's where we stand at this point in time. There. So
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So I know in the past you've explored grant opportunities, but we have, we definitely have costs right in front of us, and plan to operate fairly soon. Is there any point still going down that path or looking at any other options? Or
the best option we have, because we've gone down the road applying for grants on these culverts twice and been denied, and most likely, and particularly with grants that are for fish passages. And they just consider this a low priority, and the state really controls those. DOT controls those, and so a lot of times the money ends up back in their inventory. I think the only thing that I see on the horizon that may have a chance that we could get some funding is if the oil prices stay high and there's a large capital account, and they start looking at funding capital projects like they did the year before last, that we may be able to convince our representatives to get some funding, but I think that's a super long shot in this case. I think they're going to focus.
You think state funding is the only option?
I think state funding at this point in time is the only option. There was a whole round of fish culvert that came out, but before it even got out to small communities, it was mostly gobbled up by the state. And most of it went to the Northwest, the Seattle, the Washington State region. So Alaska got a good portion of it, but that was already tied to so many DOT projects, we couldn't get in on it.
This is a difficult question, but how much of that 600,000 each is because they're fish passages rather than just moving?
Oh, that's probably a huge portion of it.
So we'd be paying 100, 150 if they were just culvert replacements with no requirement fish passage.
Yeah, because we could put a round pipe in there and didn't have to worry about the bottom. And then, but one thing I think is a positive is that these box culverts will be able to carry larger capacity. And then the other aspect about the project is that we'll be shoring the banks with root wads, which just strengthens the residential area in there. So I think in the end, it's just a stronger product for, especially how close that creek is and affects residential units through there. I think it just in the end, it makes a better product. So. Yep, and we definitely see fish up there. After we got that new culvert on Moose Meadows, then the following week we had fish going through it.
Yeah, right.
And then cemetery.
Silent. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
My question, just real quickly, did I hear you say that is it DOT that decides those grants, or it's the state and it goes to DOT? I was just a little unclear on that.
Yeah, so most of this funding comes in federal, and especially ones particularly for fish passages, and then DOT is responsible for distributing those federal funds. And so the grant process that we went through, which was this last winter, was for communities. It was a community grant fund that they ran, and so communities apply, and then DOT has a selection committee that makes several decisions, and the first one is, do you initially qualify? And I don't even think we really got through the initial qualification. It was, yeah, so DOT really handles all those federal funds, and that's where the money's coming for projects like this.
Thanks.
And then the last one down here is cemetery. So there's still some funds stuck. I still have them there. I've just left that there because I don't know what's going to happen with cemetery. You know, and the reason for it is I just keep that account open. So there's $2,300 right now associated with cemetery there in that aspect. So. And then I did mark down here, and this was a mistake, but this would show you if fire makes their contribution this year. I think this shows what their capital count would be, but this may be a mistake I had down here before. So. Oh, okay. So this is the contributions for 23. Okay, I see what happened there. It's split. So the 154 is the combination of the 74,000 that they put for undesignated capital account, and then the remaining amount. That number's wrong. It should be actually higher because it would also include the loan amount. So I don't know what I did there. That might have been from last year. But either ways, that just shows you the contributions are this year. And then oh God, I'm sorry, I'm way off. I'm screwing myself up. This is what we're doing in 23. So this makes sense. 74,000, 80,000 for the loan. And then the contribution for Parks and Recs in 23 is 200,000, and then Parks Streets is 100,000. So 454,000. And we will
make that together makes up the number that we showed in that first table of the 600 something thousand.
That's part of it.
Capital.
Yeah.
So we have, me asking a question. We obviously fund things by taking money from effectively putting into our operating budget contributions towards capital expenditures in the future rather than doing bonds. And you know, historically we haven't had success in bonds. I think it is something we should probably continue to do occasionally, because if we don't try, we won't change that pattern.
Yeah.
But in terms of cost, is it? I mean, we're not allocating to specific projects the way we do this. Oh, sorry. When we're if we were doing a bond, we'd have to be very specific about the project, fairly specific about the project up front, and this gives us a bit more flexibility. But I'm just thinking overall in terms of cost, we're probably, by trying to save money up front, we're effectively taking bigger capital contributions because we're trying to sort of pull the money together to do a whole project.
Correct.
Rather than take a project and, you know, if it's, for example, if it's the fish passages, that's we're not going to touch them for 20, 30 years. So in principle, we could pay that money over 20 or 30 years for the life of the project. Instead, we're trying to save it over 2 or 3 or 4. So we're ending up using a much larger amount of our taxpayer funding for projects, but then we're probably also getting more projects done. So there's this kind of weird balance between the two. I'm just thinking, if bonds were an option, is that something you'd recommend that we would look at?
Yeah, I mean, if we can have success with bonds, it's just one thing about bonds is there's like so much effort that goes into getting them on the ballot.
Yes.
And then just to have them fail, and then you're like, okay, now I got to figure out the different way, you know? And so, and we just haven't had the success. The one success we did have most recently, and that's because we hit it within, is Girdwood got Engine Rescue 41 through a bond initiative, right? But we tied it in with something we could do with the fire department.
Yeah, that was because it was EMS.
Yeah. But the standalones are difficult, and you know, our most recent history is Little Bears. So, you know, I think we could try it again. You know, the other sort of creative funding ideas is see about the city and working with them on these intergovernment loans. And, you know, they have some good finance guys right now. And, you know, we look at it, and especially if we said, hey, let's try to get both culverts done this year, and maybe we take a loan out to pay to get us over the top so we can do both of them, because maybe we don't have enough funding in our roads capital account. We can look at those options. You know?
The other thing they have is quite a large sort of investment account, which they're now sort of actively managing.
Yes.
And so there's a bunch of money sitting there. And I'm sure one of the things they would invest part of it in is bonds anyway.
Yes.
Elsewhere. So there is an argument because of a weird political situation where we're this tiny part of the municipality, but we rely on everybody's approval, and we don't get it very often. If we can't solve that, then I think there's several sources within the municipality where effectively we can act as borrowing money within the MOA itself rather than going down the bond path. What I'm concerned about is just this thing that it's a combination both of we end up when we see a need, we have to wait several years before we achieve it because we have to save the money and we're pulling more money in.
Correct.
Rather than paying it over the life of the project.
Correct. Yeah, and I agree with you. Like I look at a project like, oh, well, it'll take us 5 years to save the money to make it work. But then also I think about these loans, like, well, we start taking out loans for all these different projects, we're going to be paying back payments on all these different things.
Which is the situation with bonds. You end up paying things over, paying bonds for many, many years. But then the way bonds work is you refinance them every so often. So
and you consolidate them.
They consolidate. Yeah. And there may be options of doing that within the muni.
Yeah.
But one interesting thing is this year there was although they didn't end up using it, there was a vote for Chugiak fire track that passed.
Yes.
So again, I hate to say that when it's something for Eagle River Chugiak, it's successful, but when it's something for somewhere else, they vote against it. But that is the pattern we see.
Well, the pattern we do see also in the city is that police and fire bonds always pass. Safety bonds pass. So we're doing something.
Roads typically do, but not always. That failure.
And so it may be that we try for a bond on a road project,
parks or the always passes.
And the next one, in that aspect, it's just a matter of how it works.
I think the way the bonds work, we can't be part of the same bond because we're a service area as one of the other service areas.
No, we have to be completely independent, and the bond is
some education needed.
Yeah. Speaking with capital projects, this is the list again. I do want to point out a couple things so you guys are aware. The 525,000, I talked about that earlier. That was the grant that we received from the CARES Act. And so that we're using that, and it does show up within our capital strings. And then we do have a grant for 1.2 million. And so that doesn't really particularly show up as available for the board to use, but it's there specifically designated from the state of Alaska for the building of the Glacier Creek Bridge. So we have that money. We haven't touched this money at all yet because we're using the 525,000 to do the design work, and then there for that. We will know here in the next couple of weeks what our good a solid cost estimate is going to be with the 35% design, and that 35% design is not going to, I don't think it's going to particularly change more. They're just going to get more into the very unique minute details of it. And so, but we'll have a good idea. And then I've been working with outside funders to say, hey, be ready, because we may be coming to you, one being the Rasmussen, which is very interested in helping us with over the top funding, which means get us across the finish line if we're above 1.2 million to build a bridge. So so we will have an idea and a sense what it's going to cost us hopefully here by October. Lions Club Park, we are chasing a grant for this one. The Land, Water, and Conservation Grant has been opened up by the state, and Margaret's got us started on that. And we've set an initiative with Lions Club that they need to raise $25,000. And we're basically asking for that in hard cash. And then we'll try to get them to also contribute anything in kind. And they've taken that challenge. So right now we do have an engineer estimate of about 150,000 for that build. I think it's gonna be less, but they always tend to go a little higher because this one just has variables they don't know about. So we are chasing that grant and be seeking that. Two new things I've added on here since our last meeting. One is that it's very apparent that we need a dump trailer for our operations here. And dump trailer just be a pull-behind trailer, and it can articulate up to dump out rock and gravel. We can save quite a bit on trail projects and our different projects that we do by being able to go and get dirt on our own, bring it to a project instead of asking a local contractor with a dump truck to bring it over, and then we try to figure out how do we pay for it. We become more self-efficient. And so I like to purchase this in either the end of this year or early 2024. So I'll be coming for the board with a presentation on different dump trailers that we're looking at. The cost we're seeing for what we want is on the high end, $17,000, or realistically, probably $15,000 to $17,000 range. So that's there. And then a new grooming snow machine. Our fleet is aging, and we did buy a new machine last year. Or the club, the Nordic Club bought a new machine. And what we've had this partnership is that we've had one machine, they've had one machine, and we've worked together over the years to take care of it. But we did do a test run last year with a new machine, which worked well. And I do think at some point Parks and Rec should probably get another machine, and then eventually retire our Arctic Cat machines that we work very hard to keep together. They're sort of an electrical nightmare, but we keep them running. So that could be possibly in 24. Talk about that. I couldn't right now. If you even came to right now and asked to buy one, we couldn't get a machine until 25, just because they're supply lines. So we will probably start that discussion possibly in the fall, if not early winter for 25. So, but we may encumber the funds in 24. So that's why I have it up there. And then the next things I think that we are a larger discussion and should be moving forward on is master planning for Alyeska Playfield and the Conic storage area, and probably combining that with Girdwood Park. And just having more of a master plan in there as we go forward that we can lean on, because we don't have any of that right now. So, because we have issues with our areas. The play field has really poor drainage, and so doesn't function the way it should be. I think a pocket playground could be really nice up there, and definitely improve parking and availability, especially for the winter flow up there that we get with Nordic skiing and stuff like that. And then the eventual dog park, resurface the tennis court. I probably will be coming to you earlier than later on that one. And then a batting cage, which I don't think GBS will have to get too much involved with. We've had actually a really great string of fundraising and donations for the baseball field. And so we're hoping to tap into those funds to put the batting cage in. I'm actually meeting with our roads contractor today and seeing what they will do to maybe help sponsor some material for building the batting cage over there, and a new conics in that area. So we'll be working that out. So I don't think we won't have to use service area funds for that, hopefully. Switching over to roads. Before that, any questions with the parks and rec here at all? Okay. Switching over to roads, basically street maintenance. I think these fish patches are our biggest one, based on our estimates, our engineer estimates. These next two are probably in the $1 million range to 1.5, depending on how it goes. I think, if Western comes in, they're pretty good about making it, sharpening a pencil on it. But I think with the size of these, we'll probably have to put them out to bid. Just because I think that's what purchasing is going to make us do. Rehab pedestrian safety corridor along Alberg. Once again, we applied for a grant there. This is something I think I can try to work through our operating budget and try to work with. I did get a bid from Western. It was reasonable bid. I think we can work on some things to maybe find a little bit of cost savings. But if you've been back on that on that bike pathway, there's large cracks that need to be addressed in there and some resurfacing. So we would rather work on that. Power to the Girdwood lot, we're working on that. And we just finished design, and we're currently waiting on Chugach to give us their design for the pedestal. So this will probably be a project that we do in 25. I'll probably come back to the board and talk about our costs at that point to get the power in. And then pave Timberline Pass Vale intersection. We just finished the geotech this week. We hope to have a design document to you and analysis here in the fall. So we've set that goal with the Bate company, and they're going to get the geotech probably next week, Shannon Wilson. And so we'll be moving forward and bringing you more information there. We did find Pete, but we think we can work with it in that section. So anyways, and then California Creek box culvert, update on this. We found the $1.6 million for this project. It is with the EPA. And also the other projects that were funded through for AWU for Girdwood is also with the EPA as part of, they're in charge of stormwater and drinking and sewer water infrastructure. So we need to go through an application process with the EPA to get that going. So we're actually meeting as a group between AWU and myself and Public Works this Friday to start the discussions on how we fill out those applications and then who leads. Almost like it will lead to Ruan. But what this will require is a 20% match. So if those culverts do cost, $2 million, we will, whatever it costs, we're going to have to match the 1.6 million. So, we will probably be coming back to the service area. What I'm going to try, my approach on this one is try to split a match between the service area and AWU, because we're providing infrastructure that protects both the road and the sewer main trunk. So hopefully we can find some money there, because our design for the box culvert and what we're looking at is really going to be driven because of that sewer line. The sewer line wasn't there, we would have more flexibility to design something, but it's going to constrain what we design there and probably add some expense just because we have to keep separation with that sewer line that runs over the top of this culvert. So it's good news to know that that money was there. There was just a few weeks ago, it was unclear if the money actually had been, as they call it now, congressionally designated, which means earmarked for Alaska, but we did find it and it's sitting with the EPA. What we found the problem was that the EPA was trying to contact Adam Trombley, but Adam Trombley only works here. So that was the missing link in communication there. And then these other ones here are my wish lists of things I'd love to happen down the road. A storage garage for just preparing ourselves that the current storage garage, warm garage that we have, which is the old fire hall over there, may not last. So we need to think that for the future. A covered sand storage, so we stop putting plastic over and ripping the plastic up and chasing plastic pieces all over the yard every spring. Making that just a more efficient operation there, because we put out a lot of sand in the winter. And then continue to build our capital account for infrastructure. Town Square is going to age. All this curb and gutter and storm drains that we've put in are going to age, and the service area just needs to be prepared to keep tackling those things as they arise or they fail in that aspect. Anything with roads before I jump forward to fire? Okay. Oh,
I just wanted to thank you. Go ahead. It's great.
Next one is fire. And so in action right now is the replacement of utility 41 and chief 41. So those are going to be the two Suburbans that are getting replaced with the new trucks. The trucks are here. They're waiting on the pieces and parts. We hope to see those up and operational this fall. So that should be a completed project. And we're right now on engine 41. Keep in mind of that $1.1 million you see up there, 151,000 of it is a contingency fund. So the engine is really costing us about, just over $1 million. But we have 150,000 tied. So we may not end up using that contingency fund, and they'll come back to the service area, or it'll be reopened for the service area to use for other things. The chief's going to be presenting her needs for 24. And so these are them right here, fire PPE. So 3 sets of turnouts and up to 9 helmets. She's going to need 16,000 for that in 24. And then hose, she's going to need another 500 feet of 3-inch and 500 feet of 5-inch. So $5,000 for that hose. And then gas monitors, she needs the replacement of 3 of those. And so they're each $2,000, so $6,000. So she's done a good job of looking forward at her cost needs for next year. And so her capital needs will be fairly small compared to what we've been doing for the last couple of years. But she's just keeping up with basically equipment supply that she needs that ages out. So that's what she's showing. She'll be bringing that forward when she gets true cost estimates for that. So, and then at this point in time, no capital purchase needed for police, but there's a caveat, there's an asterisk with that. We did get a cost estimate of $15,000 for the improvements of the substation that the police department's seeking. Most likely they're trying to just add more security and then make it less cumbersome to do breathalyzers at the station. So we're looking at 15,000. We just submitted it to the public safety for their consideration. They'll think about it, and then next month they may make a recommendation to come to GVUS. I think this is something we can tackle in first quarter, because what we'll probably do is restructure the lease that we pay it off over 3 years as part of the lease. So it'll be a small increase in the lease payments to pay that off. But once we get through PSAC, we'll bring it to the board for their consideration. So, okay.
Kyle?
Yeah.
Yeah, about those improvements, is there any worry about dumping money into that building and then who owns it or who? You know,
ACS owns it, and they're very much on board with the lease. They like making money off the building. You know, it's I think telecommunications, especially ACS, is looking for revenue in any way, so they're very agreeing. They haven't raised the lease on us since we've been there, so the increase would mostly be associated with probably with improvements. I do see it's functional. The fire department or the police department likes it. And we really don't have much other option here in Girdwood besides bringing in or building something new.
right. No, I agree. Yeah, they need to be able to have something they can use besides a closet for sure. So I didn't know if there's ever any worry of, you know, upgrades and then somebody buys that property or something happens, but.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's always the ACS could be bought out, but I think they've bought out several times actually since we've been there, maybe at least once. But it hasn't changed what's happening here locally.
Cool. All right, thanks.
So Chief Weston is not here today, but her fire board, and what you see in front of you here is what her fire board approved for their recommended budget for 24. And so she's out on fire in Oregon as part of her wildfire dispatching out there. So I can try to answer questions as best as we can. You know, the big changes I would say here, there is a significant increase in labor, 100,000 there, and she's trying to do more benefits for the group. With adding some sort of retirement contribution. So basically like a match of 3,000 for the 12 employees that she has there. And then she does have some increases in wages for some of those employees. So and then a reserve of 45,000 for paid on call. So she's showing these increases here, and then she is estimating what she thinks her health costs are going to be next year. I think based on her actuals for this year. So she's showing that increase there. We did, through discussions, you know, initially her presentation of the budget had significant increases in non-operating. We were able to reduce some of those back down. So she's showing a $6,000 increase right now in operating, which is kind of tied to professional services, which include the medical and legal fees and financial audit up here, and then a few other trickles, just a little bit in operating, $75 in operating. I don't know what that's tied to, but you can see those increases in those line items right there.
Kyle, to jump in really quick,
Sure.
If I could, I spoke with Chief Weston and when I was at the Board of Directors meeting, they looked at that operating expenses line, and that revision is 43,000. It was 49. So
Okay.
they suggested lowering it to 43. And then when you got down to the highlighted vehicle maintenance, or sorry. Yeah, they lowered that. But the reason they lowered the 49 to 43,000 was to move the gas monitors, because the operating expenses included the gas monitors were 6,000. They moved that over to capital as their suggestion to the chief.
And That's a great suggestion. That's something that we talk about. Anything that's capital should never be tied to the operating budget. And so I think that's gotten better over the years. You know, the thing I've always said is that this budget should be really tied mostly, even though it has a non-labor line, that most of that non-labor line is associated with personnel. So it should be tied to those areas, so that, because anything that is being bought equipment wise should be bought through the capital fund, and owned by the service area, not by the nonprofit. And so then coming down here, we have 30,000. We've been at 30,000 forever, and we know that pieces of equipment and parts are not any cheaper, but I think we continue to work with this. What we do is we hold off on capital contributions till fourth quarter, because that gives the idea of, like, if they end up having to buy sets of tires for ambulance or for an engine, those tires are going to be $10,000, and so if not more, 15,000. So that could really suck up their vehicle maintenance. Like this year, when the chief rigs had an engine rebuilt, so it's real expensive there. So sometimes what we end up, if we have a lot of expense in current capital equipment, we may have to reduce what we put into the contribution in order to keep the budget flat. So, so we do pay attention to that. And then here you can see, so the 104,000, this was based on us taking out $800,000 loan and believing we need to start paying it in January. But now that we've learned that we don't need to pay the loan until the engine arrives, which will probably be 14 months from now, we still have this 104,000 there, which I talked about earlier, putting into a special account to build a reserve that we can increase the down payment on the engine once we do take out the loan. So less loan amount, more principal paid towards the engine in that aspect. So overall, you see here in direct costs, you know, just under, well, you know, not 200,000, but under 200,000 for increase this year, between 150 and 200,000. And then you go down the ITC. So the difference really is 148,000 from this operating year to last year, which would have their mill at based on assessments right now at 2.0. So, and that probably will change depending on what assessments are, but that's where we're at right now. So I'll open up any questions anybody has with this budget or thoughts or feelings. And the contribution is the same as last year.
I'll jump in. So for a long while, the fire budget was fairly flat. I think I'm just looking back to 2015. I think we were paying about, we had a contribution of about 740,000 in 2015, and then it jumped to 840 in 2017, and then 890, but stayed there until 2021. So it was relatively flat, and clearly costs were going up. And that was the period where we kept on having problems at the end of the year where they'd spent more than we'd allocated. So there was a lot of adjustment around that period. So clearly that wasn't enough. So in 2022, we increased it to just over $1 million. And then last year, we had a huge increase, about 25%. And my recollection, although I haven't actually gone back and verified this, was there was quite a lot of discussion about, if we increase it by 25% this year, are you going to come back next year for another 15% or 10%? And we were told no. And this year is a 12% increase. So I feel there's the sort of agreements and general idea we had last year hasn't really followed through. And I want to go back and actually check exactly what the discussions were. I haven't had a chance to do that yet, but my recollection definitely is last year we saw as a catch up and go ahead. And we've basically been told this year it barely caught up and we have to have another 12% increase. And so if we look back just compared to 2020, or in fact any year beforehand, we've increased the fire budget by about 56%. I'm excluding IGCs because that's got nothing to do with fire.
Correct.
So we've seen a 56% increase in about 3 years. And now it's very close. We're playing a mill rate very close to if we had AFD over the whole of the TMA with AFD. Other parts of the Muni are paying for AFD. I think it's about 2.3. So I'm happy about us having a great fire department. I'd be even happier if the EMS funding was sorted out, because I still have a suspicion that we're subsidizing a lot of the area-wide EMS. through this process. We used to be doing it very explicitly. Since 2021, the EMS increased, the EMS money coming from the Muni increased from 207,000 to 507,000. So that helped a bit, but we're still basically, when you look at these numbers here, we're still paying, they're getting about 1.4 million for fire from the service area and about 500,000 for EMS. And yet roughly, 2/3 of the calls are EMS, and at least half their costs are EMS.
Mm-hmm.
So there's still effectively a subsidy from the service area to area-wide EMS. And that needs to be resolved. That's a bigger problem. I'm just a little uncomfortable about, accepting a 12% increase without at least referring back to the discussions we had last year. I don't know if other people have that same recollection.
Mine was
Mike?
a little different. Go ahead, Guy.
No, Mike, I remember asking that same question, I think during the third work session or something like that, curious, but if I remember correctly, I thought the reply was, we don't know. We don't know. Not, no, we're not going to come back and ask for more. Yeah, if I remember correctly, it was, well, we'll have to see what next year brings. That's how I remembered it. I don't know, but I don't remember it 100% contingent on we'll approve this, but no more from here on out. I don't think that was stated, or I don't remember voting on it because of that. But I do remember asking that question and kind of getting into ambiguous, maybe not. We'll just see what next year brings.
Yeah, I think you're correct. I was mischaracterizing it probably. I don't think it was contingent on not seeing an increase. I think at least my expectation, and I believe it was a general expectation, was that the increase we approved for 2023 would be, a significant step up, and then we would be looking at relatively small deltas from that point onwards. It wouldn't be another large increase. And when the budget is generally flat, although actually our budget isn't flat, but when we're trying to keep the budget relatively flat, a 12% increase is, I think, the largest for any individual component.
Yeah.
So I just think we need to keep that in mind.
Jennifer, did you have something?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. It is a good point. But my memory was also a little bit different of this discussion, so it'll be interesting to review it. I remember it as we actually cut back from the increase that was requested last year, enough so that it touched on some nerves. I don't remember any promise that there wouldn't be increases this year, and I would also make sure that we allow some for the dramatic increase in interest rates and cost of living and everything else. So some of this increase can be related to things that are not related to the fire department per se, right? But I still think it is a good point, and it's maybe something worth some discussion with in terms of any expectations for future years.
It's probably twofold as well. It's probably twofold as well. And there definitely has been a narrative in the past that we are underfunding the fire department, and I think I've heard a lot of criticism in that direction. And I just don't think you can look at the numbers and see that. I said it's a 56% increase over 3 years. It's there's been substantial, or it would be a 56% increase. It's been over 40% so far. And I just don't think that it's, especially when the Muni is still significantly underpaying for area-wide EMS services, it's not something, we're definitely not underfunding.
Oh, thank you, Mike. I was just going to add that I appreciate everyone's careful eye and paying attention to the budgets as we've been on this board and maybe before, and Kyle doing a really great job as well. It took me time to get familiar with these kind of presentations. And I do recall in the last few years, the fire department budget and kind of the struggle that it probably has been for different parts, and then dealing with the the department in Anchorage as well for EMS. But in looking at the numbers from 2017 and then finally being able to go to a board of directors meeting, the general consensus was that they were repeating that they were flat funded for 10 years. And I think that goes back to maybe as far as 96. And then since Chief Weston has been on, they're kind of recouping what needs to be brought to Girdwood as far as service. And the question was asked, well, if Girdwood wants this service, they should pay for this service. So I feel like if we can slide the expenses toward EMS where it's relevant and the best sensible option, that's preferred. But I'm happy to support great service and keeping our fire department where it needs to be. So I do remember the questions from last year about the increase, but the factor about inflation is undeniable, and that is something Chief Weston did bring up for as far as the municipality asking for a flat budget. So that's what I have for now, and I appreciate everyone being really particular about it. Thank you.
One quick comment on that. I've been looking back at the historical data published by OMB, and I didn't go back to the early 2000s. But yeah, we were definitely funding back to about 2015. It's hard to know how to look at the numbers because we set the mill rate cap in 2005, so that's when it was set to 6. So we've been working within that restriction since 2005 when we had far fewer services and we were paid. I think our total budget was under $1 million, and now our total budget is $4.5 million. So obviously there's been a significant increase in there, but I wasn't able to get solid numbers on the fire department before about 2012, and we were paying around 700,000 from 2012 till about 2016, and then they said it jumped up over several steps to $1 million, and now 1.4. So it's about double what it was in 2016.
I would just observe, and perhaps during the budget cycle is not the time to do this, but I think that at the same time that we found that there was need for the Board of Supervisors and land use to have sort of a mandatory number of meetings, which we've exceeded in 2023 by quite a lot. There was also a similar requirement, really, that the fire department board and the Board of Supervisors meet. And I think that, working through this communication, the fire department board's operating rules, as I understand it, really make them responsible just for hiring and maintaining the chief's position. So reviewing the budget is maybe even a little outside of their technical responsibilities. And that can happen in a board as things evolve. But I think communication between those two boards or these two boards would be helpful to just make sure that the narrative of the budgeting and their understanding of who's really supposed to pay for what and what the rules are could be helpful.
I think that's definitely who pays for what, where the different money is coming from, where the resources end up being owned.
Well,
that's a really useful discussion because it definitely confuses me still, and I've been looking at this for a few years.
Well, it's very tangled, right? And
yeah.
That's why it's complicated over at the Muni as well. And I mean, this administration is not going to put more money toward things. So
I think
their hands are tied.
I think there was an example recently of of where there was different potential funding sources, but the one which we settled on ended up not guaranteeing we would actually get it. Mm-hmm. Somebody would, but perhaps not us. Mm-hmm. So there's a kind of balance between how much control we have over assets versus who's paying for it. I think that is a very valuable discussion.
Well, I think, we were talking about GBOS goals, and maybe one of the GBOS goals that's a little higher level, but could be really helpful in the grassroots is just establishing that relationship between the two boards. I know that it can be very hard to get that group together. I also know that, their mission and their ability to get together it's just a different level of responsibility than what we're used to among our boards.
I'll just point out some things here. This is a little bit of marketing in the sense of the fire department. You know, you got a total budget of $1.7 million. 20% of that goes to AFD. It does go to help us in supporting the fire department with shop time, but you have AFD operation management there at $92,000. You get the office chief, the chief office of the fire chief gets $20,000. So there's a good portion right away that we lose right away to the muni to support the operations of here. But when you divide 1.7, that's about $5,000 a day. And when you consider the department is on 24/7, so 24 hours a day, it's costing us $200 an hour to run the fire department over there, which in this day and age, pretty good price. If you think about it, you got guys on waiting there to respond to your emergency for $200. I can barely fire up an excavator for that amount of time without getting close to $200. And that's one person in a hoe. So it's something to think about. And I realize we're trying to control costs and be responsible to taxpayers, but in the end, I think we have a very efficient fire department. And Chief has done, she took on, when she came here, we knew that she had a very difficult role to turn the ship there, get the morale right, get the operation stable. And I think some of these moves that she's showing here and these increases are associated with that.
Thank you. Thank you for
Can
all
I
of
respond
those.
to a couple of things there?
Yes.
I mean,
Go ahead, Mike.
absolutely. I think the chief has done an awesome job. I mean, just simply being able to present the budget so clearly each year is something we never had beforehand. So, you know, it's actually allowed us to ask these questions and think about these things. And I don't necessarily think it's not where we should invest, but I just want to make it, I think we should go into this clearly that this has been a significant growth area in terms of our spending and our investment. You can call it investment, it's operational. It is investment. It's investment in the community. All the numbers I've quoted are excluding IGC. So IGC is something the fire department has no control over. It's something completely separate. So, you know, when I say a 6% increase, that's in money going to the fire department, not IGCs at all. Mm-hmm. I'm surprised that is by far the biggest chunk of IGC that we pay for anything. And I am intrigued why. I mean, more than half of our IGCs, we pay about, what, 500,000 in IGCs and, you know, 350 that's for the fire department. I'm really unclear why so much is going in that direction.
Well, I can tell you one thing is that Chief does her best to use that IGC as much as possible.
Well, I guess just in terms of
in the sense in the sense of coverage, the sense of using the fire chief to handle issues, things like that. Sometimes I think it gets a little overboard, but I do appreciate the fact that we are trying to use that IGC as much. But it is something that since I've been here, we've always kept watch on these IGCs, and they've stayed within the same area. They've moved up and down, but they pretty much have stayed in the same area. But I can see the AFD shop time. They spend, especially with our aging equipment, we have stuff in there quite a bit, and they're paying for those mechanics to work on it.
I thought the same about IGCs, but when I look back, it's increased significantly. I mean, we were paying $250,000 total in 2015, and it's gone from, you know, it's been going up and up and up, and now it's over 500. So it's actually pretty much doubled but then again, I guess our budget has doubled. So our total budget excluding IGC was about 1.8 million in 2015, and it's 4 million now.
Correct.
So we've more than doubled our budget.
Well, if there's nothing else with fire.
Sorry, there is. Sorry. Margaret, could I just circle back to something you said? Did I understand you correctly that we're supposed to be having co-meetings with the fire board, or was that something that was suggested? I missed that.
I think it was more than a suggestion. It's along the same language as you will meet twice a year with the land use committee. I think at the same time, the same language is used for this. And I would not say that we have necessarily tried very hard with either group to make those meetings happen. Typically, they have occurred organically, but this year they haven't. And so maybe the additional sort of conversation would be helping at this point in the budgeting, that the board that's seated for the fire department would have a better understanding of what the service area contributions have been lately. So I guess my suggestion is not necessarily right now, but perhaps looking into 2024 to reach out.
Well, if nothing else, I think maybe all of us would appreciate a meeting prior to the start of these budget meetings with the board, so we could get kind of on the same page before these budget meetings started. It has seemed to me, unless I'm misunderstanding, that in the last few years, we've had kind of all kinds of revisions happening throughout the course of our budget meeting. It would just be so helpful to have those revisions done prior.
And I agree with you there, Jennifer. I think that would also be helpful to Chief Weston. I think one of her large frustrations this year was getting her board to respond. And she must have reached out to them over a half a dozen times to get them to organize and come together so she could have these discussions with them. And then she finally got it. And so I think maybe supporting the chief, getting her board to come together. It's always seemed to be a challenge with these fire boards and getting people to be more committed to working as the board member. So that might be a good point that we bring up with chief to organize for next year.
I also attended, sorry.
Thank you all. Just want to chime in really quick about that. And the board was under a deadline, so I think that's what ultimately made them meet. But they, as far as I understand, are supposed to meet quarterly, so 4 times a year, and they struggle to do that because just putting a date on the calendar is not happening. So it becomes Chief Weston's kind of nuisance, but responsibility to ensure that they meet. So if we can help that, we definitely should.
Can I say something about this as well? We had I also went to the board of directors meeting along with Brianna, and there was definitely some discussion outside of this budget. There was some discussion about the EMS costs and the EMS service. My recollection is that while AFD have a commit to an advanced life support level of service across the ball and Juliac, they only pay for basic life support in Girdwood, and there was some discussion around that about whether the funding level should be, the funding level reflects that basic life support. It doesn't reflect the advanced life support. So there was some discussions around that, and while it falls outside of the GBOS funding requirements, it falls within, I think, the political discussion. So that might be a useful topic to meet with the board immediately after the budget cycle. But at the time where we still have potentially there's some influence we can have on the overall municipal budget, either this year or in the revisions.
And I think that point is very good, because the fire department's still operating without a contract between AFD and them. And
this seems to be the main problem.
Correct. And we may not even see any movement on that until we figure out what and who is the new administration starting in 24. So, but it's a good thing to bring up, because I think it's something that needs to stay ahead.
There were a few thoughts and ideas bouncing around. Well, action as well.
Okay.
I wonder if we could actually schedule something for maybe October, November time
With their fire board.
We'll see if we can at least reach out.
We could put it to the chief and see if she wants to organize it. That into minutes. Okay. Any other questions with the fire? Sorry, Brianna, I may have jumped over you there.
No worries.
Okay. The next one, Brianna, you take it and I'll just follow the lead here.
Back to the agenda. Number 3 is housing and economic stability budget. And we have spoken more about this on our budget number 2 session. So I feel like this might merit further discussion today. Where do we leave off with that?
felt like we were going to go to and see if we had something coming out of the committee to see if they had a budget request. But I think one idea I proposed is this is something that we could also get a better sense for and come back and do something in first quarter once we get there. I know the committee has seemed to be firing out some different ideas about things that they wanted to explore, and they just initially started those conversations at land use. So they may be coming with something down the road, but I didn't feel like we had, at least from my office, we didn't have anything right now to present for a budget.
So my sense is the committee has just started and it's working on a couple of isolated ideas, but it absolutely has not got a coherent view of how we need to move forward on this.
Correct.
There will be a need to put together an implementable plan for housing at some point. I don't know when they'll get around to thinking about that, but if we're going to budget it, then we need to do that now, or we need to add something in the first quarter budget revisions. It's really a question of when there's any intent to act on it and actually put together a plan that can be implemented. If we don't have any intention of doing it until sometime late next year, then we can wait. If we want to do it sooner, we should act sooner. And my argument would be we should act sooner so we have something in place and we have the option rather than waiting until we guarantee that we cannot do it. And this is 2024, not 2023. I think there was a misstatement in an earlier meeting about we weren't spending it. We promised we weren't going to spend any money in 2023. We're not. We're talking about a 2024 budget.
Thank you. And I would agree that doing something soon in lieu of having this item be put forward to the voters and being diligent about offering Girdwood options, because we are in dire need 2 years ago and last year. So the voters overwhelmingly support this as a power, and putting a budget forward is something, and the committee can ultimately decide, not ultimately decide, but request or suggest what to do with that for the first goal of temporary current addressing housing needs.
I have a question. So it's my understanding in the first quarter budget revisions, this could be revisited, correct? And we're not going to have to wait till next fall to plug money into this. And I guess two-part question. And if that's the case, right now there's nothing before us, right? There's no not even detail, just an idea of where that money would go or what it would be spent on. Is there?
No, I have nothing. We haven't been presented with any numbers or what they would requesting funding for. So at this point in time, but yes, back to your first question, part one there, we can at first quarter submit a budget for this. This will be interesting as to where they put the budget. It may be a line item within one of our current operating budgets that we use, but it will allow us the power. That's what happened with cemetery. They just plugged it into our Parks and Rec budget, and then I had a line in there that I could spend money for on the cemetery. But that's just more clerical. But in this case, you could do that. And the other thing to think about too, as a board, is that you do have the undesignated account. So if you wanted to pull funds from that account, you could say if they, I know one of the things they're talking about is the feasibility study for gravel extraction here in the valley. And so if the board decides they want to support that recommendation from the committee, we can look at funding options that way instead of having to ask for it in tax.
So to respond to Guy, the reason I said I think fall was first quarter budget revision is an April-May activity. If we put something in there and we intend to actually have a RFP proposal purchasing process, that's about 3 months at the moment. So we're talking about probably, if we were at full speed and we don't allocate anything towards it, then we'd be talking about probably August, September before anything could start. So that's where the fall thing comes from. It's really the problem of the multi-month delay for anything going through purchasing. So I don't think we can bring We definitely can't. I don't think we can do motions or suggestions now necessarily in a work session.
It would have to happen next month.
So we definitely can't make decisions. But there will be something we'll discuss and bring forward as a concrete example of next at the GBOS meeting then.
Just to be clear, I did not misspeak at the last meeting. And while the voter approval of this was clear, I would like to address what I view as this misconception that automatically came with an approval of any significant taxpayer expenditure. And as I said, there was kind of a promise that it wouldn't involve that. So it's interesting to me that we'd be discussing this at the next meeting or any future meeting without something, at the very least, we have to have a budget request come out of the housing committee. I am not comfortable with any member of GBOS deciding on our own that we're going to forward fund something that hasn't been asked for by the co-chairs of the committee that we specifically tasked with leading this. So I think we can leave this for now, but if you want to explain to me somehow that's appropriate, maybe we can do it at another time. I want to just state for the record, I think it's absolutely inappropriate. We need to stick to letting that committee do what we tasked it to do, and any budget request needs to come from the committee.
I think it absolutely is appropriate to talk about it now. So I think what I hear is an abdication of responsibility that we are elected directly from the community to represent the needs of the community and to deal with at least the tax and budget aspects of the services which are within the service area and some other stuff, but at a minimum that. I did not vote when I thought the committee is a great idea and I really appreciate it. I did not vote to say they are the gatekeeper and they make the decisions and we can simply rubber stamp. And I hear this quite a lot actually in terms of rewriting what land use does, what the individual committees do, etc. We do not require them to lead and to tell us what we can and can't do. That is not the way it works and shouldn't be the way it works. So I completely reject that model.
Well, that doesn't surprise me at all, but I'm going to stick to my guns that any budget request for housing needs to come from our housing committee.
Right. And just to clarify one thing, I think you said that one person would decide in GBOS. No, they wouldn't. The board would decide, which requires multiple votes, requires 3 votes. So it would be a majority of GBOS would decide, which in fact is the point of representative democracy.
Thank you for elucidating the obvious, Mike. Knock it off.
It didn't seem to be understood. It didn't seem to be understood in the earlier statements, so it perhaps did need to be elucidated.
Any other comments about number 3 for now? I think we definitely need to revisit this as both the committee meets and the Housing Economic Stability Committee and we meet.
I guess just one more comment. I remember when putting this forward, there was definitely a small mill rate that was going to have to be levied for this operation, and I agree with that. I just we knew this was going to require some funding for sure. So yeah, I just you know, I'm definitely not opposed to funding it. It would be nice to have a little better direction, but I do remember there had been a back the napkin, just an example of what the mill rate might be based on this dollar amount. So the wording was a little funny because it said at no cost to the taxpayer, but there was actually some cost to the taxpayer, but people knew that going into it as well.
Thank you, Guy.
And it's going to need it. So.
And like Mike clarified, we can't, or we are limited to making motions during this work session. So any other comments or suggestions, but then we'll go on to roads budget for number 4. If there's nothing else. 30 minutes left.
Okay, so roads, for the most part, we do have an increase with labor. It's just associated with if we see a 3% increase, both for myself and Margaret. Margaret's will most likely happen because of the union contract in that area. So it just represents that, which is basically on par with past years. Last year, there was a larger increase thanks to the raise from my position from the board. We're keeping our operating expenses, non-labor, pretty much the same in that area. This is a balance game in what we do there. But if we're trying to complete more large capital projects this year, next year, we should have funding to keep up with our standard maintenance projects in that aspect. And that's kind of what we've done this year. We've had a lot more capital projects that we've been taking care of, and so it's working itself out. The big jump here is the contribution. So we are at 200,000 this year for contribution. I'm asking for an increase for another 100,000, so 300,000 last year. You can see there it's been a significant increase over time. And that's just me. I would say that's just me being aggressive to get after this project and get it done. And also realizing that Girdwood is living within its boundaries set by code, and we are seeing assessed values going up, and I'm taking a calculated risk that assessments are going to go up for the valley this year, again, because there's so much new construction going on out there that we're going to see an increase there. So our mill rate it will go up. I'm not going to deny it's going to go up because of these increases, but I don't think we're going to be tapping on the door of the 6 mil too much if our assessments go right. So that's just me doing that there. So that's that point there. And then once again, ITCs down below are the same as the last year. So we don't know if that changes, but you can see the IGCs here as compared to the fire department. They're very reasonable. Most of them are insurance. And then we have some licensing and SAP support, things like that. We still are paying a little bit back on SAP capital recovery, but that has gone down each year. But the big one is our admin support. And this is $55,000. It's been at $55,000 since I've been here. And we get great support from our admins in Anchorage who do all our accounting and processing of payments and then support me through projects and things like that. So 55,000 is a fairly good deal for what we're seeing there overall. So I'll open up the roads question. And right now, 1.6 mils. So is what we're estimating based off this year's assessments.
Thank you, Kyle. And I do remember over the last 2 years, you preparing us with the idea and the importance that the contributions would be climbing in the future. So this makes good sense. Thank you.
2 quick questions. One is on IGC. So the general administrative IGC comes into this particular operating area. Are there other IGCs that kind of appear and disappear? I noticed we had like $600 for the ombudsman appeared this year that we haven't seen.
Yeah, and
things like that. Are there any
that's newly appeared, and that happened this year, and I had discussions with other supervisors about this particular line, and it may just be that we've had so much activity associated, that the ombudsman's had so much activity associated with the Girdwood service area that they started applying a charge to us.
He had 3 complaints, I think.
Yeah, and what it may be is that they go and they look back at how much time they spend on everything, and then they go out and they try to collect their revenues.
But generally, we're not seeing any big things that appear and disappear each year.
No, I think the big thing that really hit us one year was that SAP capital recovery once they got done with it, and that hit everybody. But that has gone down. We've paid off SAP over the last couple of years. So hopefully that will at some point dissolve. But then you might see SAP support system go up because the system starts to age out and they need more support to make it work. So it's cyclical in the way it works. So
my second question isn't really about roads, it's about overall mill rate. I think you presented a table at the very beginning, which I unfortunately couldn't see because I was still traveling. Is it appropriate to look at the projection for this year?
Yeah, let's see if I have that. It could be down here at the bottom, actually. I didn't put in the packet for this one from Margaret to put in here. I'll try to find it. I'll find that real quick.
Yeah.
I'll come
The
back.
number I came up with, if the assessments do not change, it would be 5.93. Is that roughly where you saw it?
I had it like at 5.7 something.
But that is that based on
Current assessments. Yep. And what I do then, so this formula here is just basically the mill rate formula, and I individualize it between each one, and then I add it up in there. So
what is the total budget for this year as proposed?
let me pull it up.
Including IGCs.
I'll get into it here real quick. Here. 2 screens. You guys are seeing the inner side of our organizational nightmare. I'm gonna go back to here, and I may have updated this form, but I could have. Let's see.
What I saw was just over 4.5 million, and our tax cap would give us 4.6 million based on the 2023 assessments. But I agree with you, it's going to be higher for next year.
So I don't have the individuals. I need to go through. I'll put that together for your meeting next week. I just have the mill rates plopped in I pulled them from the budgets, and so I ended up with 5.71. But I'll go back and confirm that, and I'll put together what that bottom number represents for that mill rate, and then we can have the same thing.
Do you have the total dollar amount?
I don't have that right now. No, I have it broken down just by mill. I didn't put the dollar rate in there. So, and this was more of an exercise to help citizens understand, like for example, this $795,000 house, you pay $1,600 a year in fire, so those type of things, understand where their money's going to.
That makes sense.
Yeah. But I'll work on that and I'll put actually another line in here that represents the total, what, like 1.6 million equals $1.7 million or something.
So again, the total I saw from the individual budgets, including our estimated known revenue. I know there's also this, as we were discussing, I think by email. When I look at previous years of the official data from the Muni, our revenue is always much higher than we present in this budget process, because there is one extra source of revenue, which is effectively the interest or the investment money coming back from our savings and capital.
Correct.
Dollars. So, and that's generally 50 to 80,000 a year. So that actually helps a bit. Definitely pushes the bill rate by about 1.
Correct, and it also ends up filling our undesignated account a little bit too.
Yeah. So I think every year the estimate we get at this point is an overestimate of the number we're actually going to finally end up with, which is good. It's good to look at worst case.
A lot of times I've found it goes down by 2 or 3/10 of what I estimate.
Right.
So you're looking. So I always say, like last year, I think I had an estimate of 5.5, and we ended up with a final one of 5.3. And that 5.5 was before we made first quarter revisions, which increased some of our costs with parks.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a combination of both the fact we get extra revenue that we don't account for in the presentations GBOS, and also the increase in overall assessment. One thing that's interesting is the tax cap we have is a flat 6.0 tax cap of 6 bill. The tax cap calculated across the Muni is a tax cap based on no new construction. So they have you can spend additional money outside the tax cap, or at least it doesn't go in tax cap calculations if there's new construction or new building. And that's never something that happened here. Back in 2005, when the tax cap was put on, it was 6, assuming I don't know how much of the growth. At the time, we had a total assessed value of about 330 million, and now it's 770. And some of that growth clearly is just simply prices have gone up. And then that 770 does not reflect an median price of 1.3 million for a new house site.
no,
But that's based on probably much lower than the real sales prices are. But I don't know how much of that growth is actually just new housing, a new development, completely new development, how much of it is organic growth. But it's interesting that, I nearly said 10 years ago, but 2005 is nearly 20 years ago. 18 years ago, we put that tax cap on of 6. And since then, both the valuation of the town has gone up, but also it's much bigger than it was in 2005.
Yep.
So that's an interesting question. And the other thing is, out of that 6, although we call it operating, nearly 1 mil of that is capital.
Yes.
Is capital contributions, because we don't have the option, we're not able to use bonding.
Yep.
So other service areas have separated out a capital mill rate from an operational mill rate.
Chugiak.
Something we at Chugiak have, Chugiak Parks, I think, do.
Mhm.
And that's something we discussed about 4 or 5 years ago on GBOS. And I'm wondering if we won't do it this time. Don't think it makes sense. But again, I think that's something we should bring back and think about. I think we need to think about how we do capital funding overall. Maybe it's reasonable to say that 1 mil should be investment in sort of capital needs of our community.
Yeah.
Because as you've said before, just simply as more stuff gets built and as more infrastructure gets built and town square and the other things, it costs more money to maintain.
It ages.
It ages and it costs more to maintain. So that number, and there's the replacement costs have to be calculated. So it's probably worth when we pull together the final presentation to actually look at how much of that mill rate is just in capital and investment.
Okay. I'll try to put that together. And the point you made, how people do their, like Chugiaki River, they just find out, they basically go to their mill rate every year.
Yep.
And then they figure out their budgets. So they know, okay, we're going to have, out there, it's quite a bit more, but just as an example, we're going to have $10 million because we're going to go full mill rate. And then they figure out what their budget is with that $10 million. Whereas we try to operate with staying under our mill rate and work within it, not getting to the cap. So yeah, that's roads. Any other questions with roads? Okay. I'll just move right into parks if that's okay, Brianna.
Oh yeah, I said all that on mute. Go for it.
Just moving around, mostly of funds in here. We definitely want to put more money back up towards our seasonal labor. And we just have that flexibility because we'll take it from what we normally use for contracting trail crew, which is down here. So you can see that contracted services would drop from 39 to 24. All that money is going up into the labor line here so that we can hopefully hire 2 seasonal positions and make it work. This part-time position at 20 hours, actually, that should be striked. I'll remove that. That this would be 2 full-time positions. The guys are just here actually in the room. So otherwise, most of the lines here are all the same from last year in that area. And then the big increase here would be, once again, an increase of $100,000 to capital for parks. So that's where you're seeing the increase in this budget and tied to that. And then our GCs here are pretty straightforward. Our biggest one is facilities, which helps to maintain this facility and basically all the facilities here in Girdwood that are municipal owned land in this line here. So you see that. So like we just had the guys here yesterday replacing plumbing that had broke open and was leaking glycol all over. So they respond like that. We have full service. So yeah, so overall, we're looking at $100,000 increase, a mill rate of 0.68 and for this budget, and that's where we stand for Parks and Rec.
Thank you, Kyle. If anyone has questions, jump in or comments. If not, go ahead to police.
Okay.
Looks good.
And then police, we know the budget on this. So the biggest change that we might see, and we're not ready to propose it now, is the substation rental. But due to the fact that we have a contract and now we'll be entering year 2 of that contract, we know that contract is set at the same price for this year, next year, and 25. So that is an easy change over there. And then increase there, and then 12,000 right down here. So for miscellaneous, which we use for towing cars and PSA, all kinds of stuff. This year we're using it for the cyber awareness along with our other regular things. kids cyber awareness training that we're going to offer the parents here in October. So that's a good initiative that's coming out of PSAC, and we're happy to have the funding there to allow that to happen. Just a slight, no increase from last year, be a flat budget.
Thank you, Kyle. Any questions or comments about police budget? And I know Jennifer had a meeting at noon. So if there isn't anything else, we could go to public comment. And if I jumped ahead, we don't approve this today. We approve it at the next meeting.
So
Okay.
what I do is I open up, I encourage you, if you guys have any individual questions or you want to talk about any of these budgets, feel free to give me a call here, and before we vote, before we bring it to you for a consideration and vote on Monday, and we can go over it, and I'll try to work up some of those additional numbers that were requested, and put that into a table so that we can look at that. And I'll try to share that with you in advance, Mike, so you're seeing what you are at.
I think I've shared the analysis I did, so we can just compare it.
Perfect. And then go with that. So yeah, so I encourage you guys to give me a ring if you got any questions, or Chief Weston in that aspect. She is out, but she's available by cell. So yeah, that could work out.
Yes, thank you for being available, Kyle. We appreciate that. Go ahead, Mike.
Can I just say how much I really appreciate especially the in-depth view of the capital budget? That was really, really helpful.
Sure.
I wasn't sure we had enough to speak about at a third meeting, but I'm really pleased we did it. Thanks for all your work, Kyle.
We appreciate it. We appreciate you guys' support.
Thank you so much. Well, thanks everyone. And I don't see any people here for public comment unless one of us has a public comment. Otherwise, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn with much gratitude for this morning. Mover, Mike or Guy?
Move we adjourn?
I think Mike will second. Okay,
Second.
we're adjourned. Thank
All right,
you,
thanks,
Margaret.
everybody.
Thank you, Kyle.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Later.
Bye.